very much for the invitation again. It's quite an honor, pleasure to be here. First, I would like to start by acknowledging a great team of research staff, faculty, students that for this project. So we have Professor Abassoglu Beers and Dr. Alvarez Cribabao as the OPIs in this project, and also graduate students Spencer Cole, Jose Manuel Flores in my group that assemble all the data sets and run many of the models to estimate the impacts of drought in California through this project. We also have my colleague, Professor Dan Sommer with UC Davis, who provide a great input of expertise as someone pretty senior in the field. So this was supported by the California Department of Food and Ag through a recent grant to UC Merced, and also in collaboration with the Public Policy Institute of California. So you've probably seen some of these pictures before. The map on the left shows you the state of California in a range of colors. You have the reddish colors that show areas that have very little runoff, and then the blue and green areas that concentrate most of the runoff. So as you can see, that runoff is in the Sierra Nevada, concentrated in the northern areas that have not as much people in agriculture, and this occurs in the winter time. So there's a lot of need for this water in the Central Valley that concentrates the agriculture, and in the coastal areas that in the Central Coast and in the Southern Coast, that the southern part of the state has the largest proportion of population, as you can see. So we have, moving to the map on the right, we have a highly engineered system to move water north to south, east to west, and store it in vast networks of reservoirs, canals, aquifers, pumping stations that can make this asynchrony in the space of time of water availability and demand, to succeed, to provide water for population, environment, and agriculture. But we are now under a whiplash weather. This has been evidenced by the literature. Dr. Swain has published this article a few years ago on this whiplash weather, in which we have very dry years, such as that can last for several years, like the one in the 2012-2016 drought, followed by very humid years. So that those animations that you see there are from 2017, when we had the incident with Oroville, and also the overtopping of Berryessa Lake and through Monticello Dam. So we get that just this snowpack that is in the Sierra Nevada, which is the largest reserve of surface water for our state, can vary widely. You can see there the snow water equivalent changes a lot between years. You have the one of the driest years, 2015, followed by 2016, a little bit more snow water equivalent, sorry. Then 2017, the driest year, the wettest year on record, especially for the Sacramento River Basin. And then, you can see the sequence of years. This snow water equivalent in the snowpack varies widely, and that creates some challenges. Just in terms of precipitation, you can see that we are driven by atmospheric rivers. You probably have had other speakers here that have talked a little bit more extensively about atmospheric rivers. You get that just a handful of atmospheric rivers can make the difference between a very wet year and a very dry year. If you can see the pointer here, this was the driest year on record. This is the Sacramento River Basin. You get very little precipitation towards the end of the year, of the water year anyways, that runs from October through September. We just started a month and a half ago the new water year, right? So right now we are at 78% of average conditions. we are right here in end of November. You get to 2017, you get here that this is an atmospheric river, and then another atmospheric river here, another atmospheric river here, and that made the wettest year on record for 2017. So if we get a handful of those and are intense enough, we can have a very dry year, very wet year, sorry, and a lack of them gives also the otherwise condition. So how are we in this drought? So we have here the 2019-2020, 2020-21, and 2021 to 2022. So these 3 last years have been among the driest on records, and they are one after the other. They are pretty the driest 3-year period on record. That's my colleague Professor Abatzoglu mentions in our study. So, talking a little bit about the agricultural powerhouse, we have a sector that is 50 billion plus in terms of value. That includes crops and animal products. As it was said earlier, it is the first ranked by value in the United States. We produce more than 300 commodities. So this mosaic of agriculture, this colored map that you see, is from NAS CDL. It shows you the variety of crops that are produced in our state. We cover about 9 million acres of irrigated land. 7 of those are in the Central Valley. 420,000 jobs supported every year, and average every month. And the largest in value size in the U.S., more than 26 million acre feet of water, or roughly 80% of all the water used in the state for beneficial uses. So the other 20 is cities, communities, and well, that is roughly half of the available water in the state. The other available water in the state is used for the environment. So then we have a trend towards permanent crops. So they used to be roughly 18% or so of the irrigated area in the state. Now we're probably above 30%, or not in growing. They also give about roughly like more than 60% of the value in agriculture of permanent crops. This creates some challenges, of course, because we have regulation of groundwater that requires groundwater basins at a local level to reach a balance between extraction and recharge by year 2040. This is through the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This animation, I owe this to my colleague, Dr. Rob Gailey, once a student with Professor Jay Lund. It shows you a map that shows the green areas and the blue areas. Blue areas are permanent crops, and the green areas are annual crops. You can see this is Kern County. You can see how the permanent crops are taking over some of the terrain. Why is that this creates a challenge? Is because they need to be irrigated every year, regardless of the hydrologic conditions. So permanent crops get a big toll on yields, which determine the output, the economic output, if they are under irrigated. So this creates a challenge, especially in areas that rely heavily on groundwater. So this shows you another evolution of cropland in the Central Valley. This was put together by my students, Jose Spencer, and formerly my group, Alex Guzman. You just scan the QR code. You can play a little bit with the data and create your own chart, but essentially you can see that almost pistachios, walnuts are growing rapidly through the Sacramento Valley and also the San Joaquin Valley, and just taking over some of the other low-value commodities in the states. It was also part of the California water flow, so please take a look. So agriculture, as it was said, is a relatively small proportion of the state economy. We're talking about maybe 2% of the gross domestic product, even when you take into account food processing. But that is kind of an unfair way of characterizing it, because in places like the San Joaquin Valley, it represents a lot of the economy, and the activities are driven by the agricultural sector. So while the state as a whole does not rely a lot on agriculture, and we are not talking here about a food security issue. Agriculture is an important part of the identity and employment and income in some parts of the state, such as the Central Valley. So so what do we do with our drought assessment? So we look at the 2020-22 drought. We look at the last 3 years and compare to baseline pre-drought conditions. So the last year before this drought was 2019. We also have the last year with the land use available that was made available through the Department of Water Resources. There's a company that has been conducting these land use surveys. And that is is publicly available through the Department of Water Resources. We also look at the water supply portfolio from 2012 to 2016 to see what is the change on the water supply sources for agriculture through cycles of wet years, dry years, normal years, and how these change. So we took a look at those available also through the Department of Water Resources. We also were pending of announcements from allocations from the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, the two main project water projects, the two water supply projects in the state. Then also announcement from the Water Resources Control Board that regulates diversions and all that, and oversees all the water rights in the state, including private appropriation, doctrine, riparian, and others. And we also interviewed irrigation districts and other and water managers. And we also use remote sensing data from Professor Abasoglu's group. We look into CBOC, which is one of the models that is through the OpenET platform that is available for downloading, restriction. And John Abasoglu and Santos in our group at UC Merced conducted this analysis to see where the changes in evapotranspiration. This is the coverage of our study. We look into the northern intermountain basins, including the Scott Valley, the Shasta and Pitt River, those areas, the Russian River, Sonoma Mendocino, also the Central Coast, Watsonville, the Salinas Valley, the three basins in the Central Valley, the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Tulare Lake. Coastal areas in the south, in Ventura, San Polen, in the Colorado River. We cover Coachella, Palo Verde, and Imperial Valley. And they all, as you will see, have different kinds of impacts during this drought. So how this drought is different from previous droughts, because droughts are recurrent events. Droughts come in various flavors every time. And but one of the things that we can say, this is the 2012-2016 drought. We call it towards August of 2015. We can see there that the wet areas are the percentage of average precipitation. This map was put together by my colleague Alvarez de Babao, Copia in the project, and senior research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. So this shows you the distribution of precipitation across the state. And you can see that in this drought, the areas that in my initial map were blue now have the lowest precipitation. Why is this important? These areas provide most of the water, along with the snowpack, obviously, in the Sierra Nevada, through the state. They provide most of the runoff for the state and the water that can be diverted and exported from the northern parts of the state to the southern parts of the state. So that's for a beginning. So we had a lot of the areas in the north that are usually wet, very dry in this drought compared to the past drought. The past drought was, I would say that this is kind of the drought of the Sacramento Valley, and the previous drought was more of a drought of the San Joaquin Valley. So another interesting finding, and this was again with a chart put together by my colleague, Professor Evaporative at UC Merced, climatologist. You can see here the years on the past drought, 2012, 13, 14, 15. You can just locate those in this little cluster here. And this is evaporative demand, and this is precipitation. I was talking earlier to the students in this room about the evapotranspiration, which is a proxy for consumptive use. That is water that is utilized by plants and it gets lost to the system, does not go as runoff, and does not seep into the aquifers, right? So with a very dry year, after two very dry years, the third year on the drought, you get this increased evaporative demand. That is the water that is again lost to the system that is needed by plants. So plants, if it is a very thirsty atmosphere, gets more water out of the plants, and therefore you have higher irrigation requirements. So that was a big finding as we were conducting this drought. This demand can be as high as 5 inches in some places, but it's from 3 to 5. And 3 to 5 inches, it might sound like very little increase in the water that you need to apply to crops. But if you extend, let's say, 2 inches through the entire Central Valley, which is 6 million acres, that is 1 million acre-foot of additional demand just because the atmosphere is very thirsty. And that is the size of a reservoir like Folsom. So that is a lot of water. So you have a very low reserves in surface storage. You have overdrafted aquifers, and now you require more water to irrigate crops. So this furthers the gap between the amount of water that is available and the demand for crops. So we are putting together Dr. Moyer's postdoc with Professor Beers has a paper on the review on this, and so keep posted on that. But this is something to take into account and one of the findings. There's also on the better side is there were increased releases in the reservoirs in the San Joaquin Valley that relies a lot on imports, but had a slightly better conditions this year compared this year, meaning 2022 compared to 2021. So we had a few rains that recovered the levels of some reservoirs. You can see here, this is the Sacramento River in orange. This is the San Joaquin River in blue, and this is the Tulare Lake. So there's a little bump here in the level of storage that allow increased releases in the Tulare Lake Basin. So this also shows you levels in the reservoirs by drought warning, moderate drought, and severe drought. So some of these reservoirs came out of drought, particularly in the San Joaquin Valley. The San Joaquin Valley at large. When I say San Joaquin Valley, I refer to the San Joaquin River Basin and the Tulare Lake Basin, the two southern basins in the Central Valley. So you can see here that there was an increase in releases in the Tulare Lake Basin, and staying more or less the same in the San Joaquin River Basin. So what are the water conditions for the drought? For 2021, overall we had roughly a shortage 1.8 million acre-foot. Just to give you an idea, the crops use about 4 feet of applied water in average the state, so that can give you some sense of how much that translates into acreages. So for 2021, we have an estimate of 1.8 million acre-foot, and for 2022, 2.6 million acre-foot. And this is mostly dominated by the Sacramento Valley that had saw the largest shortages of water. So we start with decreased deliveries, so we get these percentage reductions in surface water, but we are able to increase groundwater pumping if we have access to groundwater, and that decreases the amount of shortage by basing to just this small amount of 11% in the Sacramento Valley, 4% in the San Joaquin Valley, and 10% in the Tulare Lake Basin. So for this year that just passed, water year I mean, we can see that a shortage of nearly 50% of the supplies to agriculture from surface can be decreased by a 65% increase in pumping, just to give a net 22% shortage in the basin. These, as you can see, were much more pronounced. So all this drought, as I mentioned, is a drought of the Sacramento Valley. So how does this look in terms of idling? So in this map that was put together by my colleagues at UC Merced, it shows you that the reddish area is what we identify as following based on actual evapotranspiration and vegetation indexes. You can see that you get much more darker areas here in the Sacramento Valley in 2022. A lot of that is shortages of water to many of the areas in the western part of the valley. There's a lot of rice grown there, and some water transfers also to the south. So having this ability allows us to make the drought cost to decrease the drought cost essentially. So how does this idle land relates is to the baseline to 2019. We estimate that for the areas covered in the study, we get about 7.6 million acres out of the 9.3 million. So you get a sense of the coverage of the study. We estimate 563 with respect to 2019 conditions and 752 with respect to 2019 conditions. You can see that about 696 roughly 1,000 acres are in the Central Valley, a lot of those in the Sacramento Valley, and obviously there's 5 million acres in the San Joaquin and Tulare Lake Basin together. Roughly 300,000 of those are in the San Joaquin Valley. Not as bad as the last drought, but still a significant amount of acreages that increase in idle land with respect to the 2019 condition. So how does this translate in terms of jobs, revenues? So this is 2021. So we estimate 1.8 million acre-foot of shortage. Again, we have surface water shortage, we have increased pumping, and that gave us a net of 1.8 million acre-foot. 563,000 acres, 524 in the Central Valley, and the rest in some of the areas in the coast and the northern and the mountain base valleys. So we also get crop revenue losses of 1.3 billion, about 1.1 in the Central Valley. So if you recall my slide on the California agriculture, we are talking about 1.1 billion, well, 1.3 billion out of maybe 40 billion is in crops. The rest is in animal products. So 12 to 15 billion are in milk, and beef cattle and other animal products, right? So it is a relatively small proportion of the total value of agriculture, if you think about it, but it is a significant source of employment for many areas in the valley that rely on agriculture for an income. Roughly almost like 10,000 jobs lost. If you recall, we support with agriculture roughly 420,000 jobs every year, and roughly 9,000 are located in the Central Valley. So coastal agriculture suffered from yield losses. So there's yield losses related to under irrigation, but there's like in the places in the north part of, well, north part is not the coastal, sorry. So there's a declining yields in some of the crops in the Russian River, for example. They have like vine crops. The yield losses can be significant in terms of value because the per acre value is pretty high from vines. And in the northern parts of the state, we saw a decline in the yields for some of the feed crops. Feed crops per se are not as valuable as an acre of grapes or broccoli or strawberries or other crops that you have in the higher end of the spectrum, right? But they are very important for downstream sectors such as dairies that are the highest commodity in value in agriculture, with roughly $10 billion depending on the milk price. So out of the 50, that's roughly 20% or so, 25 when we take into account meat. That they are an important source for those, and the feed crops are important for downstream sectors. And we saw some decreases in that. So that was 2021. 2022, we get more extensive shortages, particularly in the Sacramento Valley. You can see there 2.6 million acre-foot. That yields roughly close to 700,000 acres of idle land in the Central Valley alone. The number of jobs not supported gets to 12,000 in the statewide, 10,000 in the Central Valley. You saw in the map extensive following in the Sacramento Valley. Many of these areas are basically rice, and rice has the ability to can serve in a way as a buffer for more extensive idling in the San Joaquin Valley, which can be very costly, given the mosaic of crops. That includes a lot of permanent crops, vegetables, fruits, nuts, other things that are pretty high value per unit area and unit of applied water. You also get, again, some yield losses due to heat waves and stress due to under irrigation and other things. Some signs for hope, and this was prepared by my colleague Alvarez Tibabao. This is the last drought, 2012 to 2014. This is essentially groundwater declines in wells, in agricultural wells across the Central Valley. You can see that the darker areas in the past drought were concentrated in the Tulare Lake Basin here, whereas in this drought, a lot of the declines in the levels were in the Sacramento Valley, and it's an indication of the groundwater replacement that there occurred, and confirms kind of our findings on water shortages across valley. Pumping costs increase obviously as a result of the need to substitute surface water losses. So you can see that this cost can be 200 in 2021 and just above 100 million in 2022. So drought also raises some challenges for Sigma. This shows you a map prepared by my colleague Alvarez Tibabao, and shows you domestic wells that went dry in 2021. And in 2022, you can see that there's a big proportion in the, a lot of them were in 2022 so far, in roughly 1,100 dry wells due to drought. There was also some issues with subsidence, and some there was not as much overpumping in the San Joaquin Valley this time around due to hopefully to the groundwater sustainability plans, but it is a bit speculative to say that is due to signal. It is, I could say that it's a lot due to better conditions and higher releases, but there's some signs for hope on those. So how about drought and livestock? So as I was mentioning earlier, like the feed crops that constitute a big part of the acreages of California, and just as a general piece of information, more than 70% of the irrigated area in the Colorado River Basin states, which includes the 7 states, is on feed crops for cattle. So there's in California we don't have as much acres in feed crops, obviously, but we have a strong commodity prices, strong milk prices nationwide. Milk prices, by the way, are more of a nation, a U.S. price more than a California price. So there's also a big there's increases in price due to the post-pandemic recovery and other matters. So that has incentivized production in milk and the beef cattle sector. So they demand for the feed crops, and you will usually see a decline in this acreage of these crops. But in this drought, the demand for those was strong. So you see a lot of area irrigated even in pasture and alfalfa and others in silage corn. As some of you know, it's probably 600,000 acres of corn in the state. Maybe 400 of those are just for cows. It's silage corn. So there's a big demand for those. They demand a lot of water. They have to be grown very close to the dairies because they are because of their high water content. So both with the shortages in the Colorado River Basin, we might expect some more pressure on this sector. There was no decline in the number of cows at the end of 2021. What is a bit early to tell about 2022. We will know in about 3 more months about the influence on drought on the livestock sector. So what about food processing? We were asked by the California Board of Food and Ag to look a little bit more into this. And well, it's a $33 billion sector with 90,000 jobs, not as many as in as agriculture. Agriculture supports 420. Statewide, the food processing and beverages sector supports roughly 250,000 jobs. So we estimate, based on the shortages of crops and animal products for these sectors, $2.3 billion and roughly close to 5,000 jobs lost in 2021. And in 2022, that number increased to 3.5 billion in gross revenue losses and 73,000 jobs. So the impact is not as conscious, but it's not as it's roughly 10% of the for 2022, but deserves some attention. What are other things in considering for these studies is one is prices, yields, water transfers, insurance, chain of supply, global issues. So as you know, we have a war going on that has put a lot of pressure on the fuel prices. Agriculture needs fuel for running many things. There's also big disruptions in the chain of supply of vehicles, fuel prices, just like getting products out of our seaports. So we have a higher inventory of almost, for example, the stock that fortunately have a good shelf life. Otherwise, we will start seeing some more important losses. But higher inventories can bring some prices down, so that it is a consideration here. Then we also have that some of the counties in the Central Valley have seen increases in revenues in agriculture. And it's not to say that we're doing better with droughts. It's a matter of price pressures or of prices. Some commodities become more valuable due to drought or many other demand-supply nuances that happen independently of the hydrologic cycles. So there's also insurance. Some crops such as rice, cotton get access to the Farm Service Agency crop prevented fallowing programs, and so they can get some relief during droughts, but that is not extensive to all crops. So they can be certainly helpful. So water transfers also is a part that is important to emphasize. If you saw the maps of idling, you can see that the idling in the Sacramento Valley was concentrated in areas of rice mostly. These crop commodity groups can sell water to permanent crops that cannot idle. One year stop irrigation, the next year you resume. That they don't have that flexibility built. Therefore, they need to acquire water at whatever cost it is, or just do some opportunistic replacement of fall trees that have seen some yield declines. So what else? So this is a kind of a summary of the direct impacts of drought in 2021 and 2022. We can see that roughly we get crop and revenue losses that of close to 5% for crops. We get about 2.8% decrease in job losses. 2.8 jobs lost, percent of job loss compared to base conditions. And also for food processing, roughly 10.5% of the revenues and 8.1% of the jobs. So considering the magnitude of the shortages in water, the impacts can be relatively small. So as one of the driest and hottest 3-year period, this drought brought significant deficit in precipitation and higher evaporative demand. The carryover effects contributed to drought in rich areas like the Sacramento Valley, with 1.7 million acre-foot in shortages and 2.6 in 2021-2022. Roughly 752,000 acres idle in 2022, a little less in 2021, and 1.7 billion in 2022 for direct crop revenue losses. Overall, well, we have also impacts, as was mentioned, of in the food processing sector of close to 3.5 billion in 2022. And well, one of the remarkable things is that we have weathered the recent droughts and learning from them as we become more resilient for future droughts. But now, droughts, rural communities are hit the hardest. So those 10,000 jobs, we shouldn't say lightly, even if it is just a small proportion of the total employment, because these jobs are not my job and people in the room's job. These are people that belongs to the lowest income groups in the state that require assistance in terms of help for paying bills, commuting, childcare. If you get some hotspot for idle land, then you have many of these workers have to displace longer distances, and they also get affected by dry wells. They also get affected by the income from agriculture. So they face much more challenges than other income groups in the state. So having these safety nets in the areas that are more prone to drought are some of the things that we are intended to achieve with our study. So we have a strong commodity prices due to a pandemic, but there are some sectors that deserve some attention, such as the communities that rely on agriculture and are affected by both employment and access to safe drinking water. You can see in this chart here, the fluctuation in employment is a little bit more when it's compared to other areas of the state, and this is for the San Joaquin Valley. So opportunities for data, agency-funded land use programs are really helpful. The last year available for land use that we have is 2019, and we are in 2022. So investing some on that will be helpful, not only for studying drought, but also studying adaptation, how our landscape adapts to weather droughts. Crop insurance, as I mentioned, provides some relief. Pay for idling programs. We just had last year the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta launched a pilot program paying for idling for stopping irrigation. So there's some savings that can be achieved, and this is a good way to incentivize. The Colorado River Basin states are also doing that. So this can merit some attention, and hopefully some of this can get incentivized in the future. So working with commodity groups is a stakeholder is also important, and also collaborative tools for identifying system-wide vulnerabilities is an area of opportunity. Other takeaways. So impact of drought varies widely by region. Groundwater remains one of the most important buffers for us to against drought. A healthy mix of perennial crops and annual crops can avoid more costly droughts. Coastal droughts are more costly in terms of unit of water and unit of land. And droughts for systems thinking. You cannot only think in terms of jobs and income and water use and applied water and irrigation system and anything. It's all connected, and water is not a sector, it's a connector for many of these things. And lastly, downstream sectors also deserve some attention because of the high value that is in them, thanks to the products of our agricultural commodities, in animal products, crop products. And with that, I would like to, we have an expert panel composed by various members of the UC system and the California State University and USDA, the Cooperative Extension. We are meeting in the fall of 2022 to continue some of our projects under this 30-month study funded by CDFA. We're going to look into water rates in agriculture and also impacts on communities, and just developing some web tools to better visualize and disseminate these results from the study. With that, I would like to take again the invitation, and I welcome any questions.
I'm going to give Brooke just a second to go ahead and stop the recording. And we will take questions from in person first, and then go over to online. So if you want to go ahead and raise your hand.